Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming tonight. What we might do is just leave it for one more minute to let the latecomers have some time to check in and log in on time, and then we'll get started properly. All right, it's 2 minutes past, so I think we can get going. Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to tonight's event, organised by PBI UK. Now, I can see that we have people joining us from lots of different places, so thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Before I say any more, I just want to point out that this is a bilingual event. So fortunately, what that means is that we have interpreters on hand to assist us. So for those of you who prefer Spanish or English, please don't worry. Please just make sure that you correct the correct language so that you can benefit from the simultaneous translation. So what you will see is at the bottom of your screen, there is a globe button, and that allows you to select the language that works best for you. Now, that will be ongoing throughout tonight's event, but just so that you're aware, while the film itself is being shown, there will be Spanish subtitles on that because the film is in English. Otherwise, if you stay in this channel, what you might encounter is that we're switching between Spanish and English throughout the event. So first things first, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Sophia Kerridge, and I am a former field volunteer in PBI Colombia, where I did 2 stints. So I was there for a total of about 2.5 years, because back when I was a volunteer, we did 12-month stints in the field teams. Now, I returned from Colombia about 10 years ago, and I'm now on the board of trustees of PBI UK. And essentially, that's a volunteer position, and I do that alongside my paid work as a criminal barrister here in the UK. So I'm going to be guiding you through tonight's event. We're expecting it to last about an hour, so then hopefully you can get on with the rest of your evening. Now, the aim of tonight's event is to offer a little bit of an introduction about what it means to be a frontline volunteer with PBI, and also to allow you to understand a bit of the work that PBI does, and also why it matters. Now, for those of you who are interested, we'll also hopefully be offering you some advice about how you might be able to get involved, because there are a number of ways that you can engage with PBI. Those of you who are organised and who have already been on the PBI UK website might have spotted that there are some opportunities available at the moment. Now, the Colombia field team is currently recruiting for field volunteers. So for those of you who are interested in that opportunity, the deadline is the 2nd of March. For those of you perhaps that might be keener to stay in the UK or volunteer your time from the UK, PBI UK is currently also recruiting a programme support intern. And so the deadline for that is the 1st of March. Now, every time that I'm referring to an opportunity or something that can be found on the internet, Christina's going to very helpfully post it up in the group chat. So if you look on the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there is a little button that points to the chat. And so she's got the links to those various opportunities as well. At the end of today's event, what we're also going to be doing is providing an email, and that will compile all of the links that and opportunities that we're referring to in today's event as well. Now, the lineup for today, for this evening, is that what I'm briefly going to do is explain a little bit about how PBI works. And then right after that, we'll be showing you a short video called In the Company of Hope, which is essentially about the volunteer experience in PBI. After that, we will be having a discussion with two individuals who have first-hand experience of how PBI works on the ground. So I'm just going to briefly introduce them now. The first of those is Germán Romero Sanchez. He is a lawyer with an organization called DH Colombia. Now, Germán, in his work, represents victims of serious human rights violations. And of course, through his work as a lawyer, what he is doing is he's seeking truth, justice, and reparations for those victims. Now, the organization that he works with, that's an organization whose objective is to promote, to disseminate, to protect, and to work in the defense of human rights. And DH Colombia is an organization that has been accompanied by PBI since 2016. Now, our second panelist is Marie Zeller. Marie Zeller is a social worker, and so she's currently living and working in Germany, but she is a former field volunteer who worked with PBI also in Colombia. And she was there between 2019 and between 2023. So obviously she was there during a very challenging time because of course it was when COVID was happening. Now, she worked in Colombia in two of the field teams that are there. She worked in Bogota, which is the capital, and also in Barranca Bermeja. She was in fact involved in reopening the Barranca Bermeja office once again. And she also worked as a coordinator of the Bogota team. Now, she was there obviously for quite a considerable period of time. And so it's perhaps important or helpful to know that for the last 2 years of her time working in PBI Colombia, she was in fact sponsored by the Civil Peace Service, which is a program of the German government. Now, we'll be hearing from both of those accomplished individuals in a bit of a panel discussion before we'll then open up to a bit of a Q&A session so that those of you who have tuned in to participate today can ask any questions that you might have of either Germán or of Marie. Please don't be inhibited. Questions are very welcome. What we would ask you to do if you do have a question is throughout tonight's event, please post the question in the group, in the webinar chat. You can write your question in English, you can write it in Spanish, but importantly, please let us know if you would like to ask the question yourself, or if you would prefer me to ask a question for you. What that will allow us to do is if it's a question that you want to ask yourself, make sure that we unmute the microphone when it's time so that you can ask the question of the panelist. And otherwise, of course, the question will get passed through to me so I can ask it on your behalf. All right, so I think at this stage, let's get started. Now, as I said at the beginning, the first thing I wanted to do before we turn to the video is just to briefly explain how PBI works, since some of you may not be very familiar with it. PBI is an organisation that is committed to supporting the work of human rights defenders through non-violence. Now, some of you may have heard terms such as protective accompaniment. Some of you may have heard the term unarmed peacekeeping, because that's sometimes thrown around when people are trying to describe what PBI does. Now, what I would say is that neither of those terms really explain what PBI does, because it does so much more than that. What PBI does is it essentially opens up a space for peace. And so what that means is that people that are operating or working in a context of violence or conflict that are human rights defenders, it allows them to operate in that environment in defense of human rights in a situation of improved safety. So how does PBI do that? Now, Firstly, it's important that you know that PBI works only on request. So only where PBI is invited or it's asked to assist by local human rights defenders. So, for example, where a human rights defender, and this can be, for example, a community group, it can be lawyers like Germán, it can be journalists or victims' rights groups, where they are threatened for the work that they do, they might come to PBI and ask us to accompany them in their work. Now, that accompaniment takes a number of different forms, depending on, firstly, the context, but also we have to consider the nature of the threat that that organisation or those individuals are faced with, and what sort of accompaniment would work best to tackle it. What PBI really offers is an international presence, and that can be in the form of physical accompaniment or observation in the field, or it can be through our huge support network that spans a number of different levels in various different countries. And what that provides is it essentially shines a light on the threats that those human rights defenders face in order to dissuade the people who are behind those threats from continuing with those threats or from taking things further. And the way that it works is essentially by PBI drawing attention to those security problems. It puts pressure on governments and international authorities to take responsibility for the safety of those human rights defenders. The other thing that PBI does is it offers tools for managing risk, and it provides guidance on how to engage the international community in order to mitigate the risks that human rights defenders face because of the work that they do. And so really what we are seeing is that PBI offers what we call a holistic accompaniment. And that is really why PBI is so effective in helping the human rights defenders that it accompanies. Now, one thing that's also important to keep in mind when we try to understand what PBI does is it's important to know that PBI doesn't get involved in the work that human rights defenders do on the ground. What we do is essentially we defend the defenders. So again, to go back to where we started, what we've done by accompanying human rights defenders is we've opened up a space of safety so that those human rights defenders can do the work that they are so good at. Now, PBI has been around since 1983. We've got field teams in various different countries, predominantly, you may have noticed, in Latin America. But it's important to know that we've also had field teams in other countries. We've had field teams in Sri Lanka, in Indonesia. We've had field presences in Nepal, and we also have a field team currently in Kenya. So we've been going for 40 years, and we're still going strong. Now, the film that we are about to watch, In the Company of Home, this was a film made by Helen Selker and Charlotte Ginsburg. And those two women were inspired to make this short film after hearing firsthand from former volunteers about their experiences in the field. So at the launch event for the video, essentially they described how impressed they were by the lasting impression that being a field volunteer had on those individuals, even after they'd returned back from the field. So we hope that this video will give you a little bit of a taste of what it might be like to be a volunteer in the field. Now, just before we get started and we put that video on, just to let you know that if any of you have any problems watching the video on this Zoom event, there's also a link in the web chat so that you can link it through from there as well. But without further ado, let's watch the video. I think we might be having some audio problems. I don't know if anyone else can hear. It's always the way with these events that there's going to be a technical problem of some sort along the way. I can promise you we tested it earlier.
Still not working, Sophia?
I can't hear anything, I'm afraid.
One moment.
There's something very powerful with volunteering. You do it because you're convinced of something, because you really want to do that.
I was 28 when I started running on my own. Before that, was quite scared. So something happened in my life, went through a relationship, it broke up, and I just had the strength. I thought, yes, I'm going to do this.
PBI struggling is something that it's literally a model built around your role as somebody from elsewhere, supporting local struggles, as a foreigner, as somebody outside, showing solidarity, wanting to support but without doing harm.
Volunteering is not a one-way process. It never is. One person on their own doesn't bring about change. It's when you come together and work together that change happens.
There's absolutely one person who I would say is probably the person who's changed my life more than anybody else. A human rights defender called Valentina Rosendo Cantu, when she was very young, was one of several Indigenous women who were raped by soldiers. What distinguishes her and her fellow Indigenous leader, Inez, is that they denounced the rapes, they reported them, and they demanded justice. They were getting death threats, their kids were getting death threats. Clearly somebody had the objective of silencing them. And amazingly, they kept going. Valentina and Inez took their cases to the Inter-American Court, and the Inter-American Court found the Mexican state guilty. And that's an incredible example of how two women would not be silenced in standing up, because they were raped. They were at the sharpest end of the abuses in Mexico. They struggled and fought in the face of such adversity, and they ultimately got a decision that could affect all Mexicans. And what is inspiring for all of us is that she says that having international and national level accompaniment allows her to really build on that capacity and pull it out to the forefront and never give up.
My first week back in the UK, I decided to meet some ex-colleagues from PBI in London, and crossing the bridge, the first thing I do is I hear the helicopter, and I'm backing, I'm back to find a place to hide. And that's when I thought, you know, the impact of on the economy. Helicopter is danger. A helicopter is gunshots. If you live in fear, then you're not free. The choice to leave. People living there, they don't have the choice. In a way, I felt it allows us, it's the international line, to tell the story to the outside world, which is critical. You know, otherwise, who's going to listen? Who's going to know what's happening?
And in this work, you sometimes face very dark moments and dark situations, because there is terrible things that are happening to the people, and sometimes you can't do anything about it. But then there's also the lightness, the hope people have, the solutions, the joy of people. And that's, I think, what human rights defenders often bring with them. All of the experiences I had with PBI, but also with what I'm currently doing, and you grow and learn constantly. And this so much you can learn from other people. And I think it's about listening, really listening to what other people are saying, and not disempowering them and not thinking I know what's best, but hearing from them, those who are affected by something, how they would like to find a solution, and supporting them.
That it's about trying to make change, about seeing social justice come about supporting those who need a voice for their rights to be heard. It touched me on a different level, that it changed what was important for me in a way. That all of a sudden you begin to realise that a lot of petty things that used to get annoyed and upset and ultimately didn't matter actually anymore. Seeing how people put life first, seeing how people believe it being really positive about how to go forward with things. The core things that so many other things around them really they don't matter.
Thank you, Christina. And I hope that video offered a bit of an insight into the volunteer experience and really how it rubs off, and it's a lingering experience for those of us that have had the opportunity to be field volunteers and come back or leave the country afterwards, and how it really stays with us. Now at this stage we'll move on to the panel section of this event. So fortunately, as I've already indicated, we've got two wonderful panelists, Germán and Marie, who are going to explain to us firsthand what it's like to be on the ground. Now, Germán, of course, is someone whose organisation is accompanied by PBI, so it's probably a good place to start with him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch into Spanish and see how rusty it has become in the years since I've left Colombia. But Germán, buenas noches. O buenas tardes para ti, veo que todavía es...
Good afternoon, Germán. I see that you're here with us. Thank you so much for being here with us and for accompanying us in this event. It's a great pleasure to be able to hear about your experience as an accompanied person by PBI. Just to get started, I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about your work as a lawyer and as a human rights defender in Colombia, and what brought you to ask for PBI accompaniment? Sure. Well, a very special greeting to all the people who are here or who are with PBI or who have been with PBI. I feel something really deep in my heart for PBI, and so does my whole team. We always have you in mind. So I graduated as a lawyer more or less in 2005, 2006. But before I graduated, I was already working as a judicial or legal advisor as a student when I was working on human rights. So in 2002, I got to know PBI. I was part of another organization in Colombia, and PBI is still accompanying that organization. Later on, I saw PBI. Oh, sorry. Something is bothering me here. Okay. So after that, I was in another organization that is also accompanied by PBI. So I was the legal coordinator and lawyer. And now it's the DH Colombia. And so it's been a long time that PBI has been accompanying our foundation since 2014, 2015. So my work has to do with two main themes as a lawyer. So the first one is working with campesino or peasant and indigenous communities and Afro-Colombian communities to be able to stay in their territory, to defend their territory, and to have access to land, and to guarantee the protection of natural resources from the threat of mega projects. So that's an example of the type of work that I've been working on in Curuba or in San Jose Partago, with the Rios Vivos movement in Antioquia, which is working to save a river that has been messed up by a hydroelectric project. And with many families across the country, we've accompanied those families so that their lands can be returned to them, so that they can go back to their rural and campesina lifestyle after they were pushed off because of military forces or by different actors, including the national government's actors. Another part of my work, a huge part of my work, is the struggle against impunity in cases of grave human rights violations committed by public forces, state forces, whether by members of the National Army, members of the National Police, or by intelligence in the cases of forced disappearances, extrajudicial execution, torture, and also in cases of eye damage or eye injuries carried out in protests against human rights defenders who are demanding better lives in their communities. We've also seen other defenses, for instance, where like police go after people and arrest them unjustly. So those are the two main areas in which we've been moving and where I work. It's not necessarily that I love the law so much, I have to recognize that. But I believe that through these two areas, I've been able to find meaning. And that meaning has to do with the collective, the possibility of working together in community, the possibility of working in the field. There's nothing more important to me than being able to be in the field, being able to be directly with the families, with the communities, and be able to bring forward strategic litigation in different cities and municipalities across the country. Because normally the state nor the media have the capacity to go to those places, nor the international community. And so what is it that made you ask for a PBI accompaniment, Germán? Well, as I mentioned, Sophia, I had three different periods of time with PBI. The first two were not that I had to ask for accompaniment myself. There was already accompaniment of the two organizations where I was working. So the first one, I was with them more than 20 years ago in 2003, 2004, and it was an organization of lawyers that were accompanied. But something that was really powerful and important for me is that in that time, in that team, the team was being persecuted. All the lawyers were being persecuted by an intelligence organization, like the secret police of Colombia. And I remember that I was working directly with a lawyer, and she had an attack against her. They shot at her. They left like dolls covered with blood, and they said that's what they were going to do to our daughter. And then in the second organization, I was working in the field. I was a lawyer. Basically, 80% of my life as a lawyer in this organization was I was working directly in indigenous and campesino communities and Afro-Colombian communities. That's what I was doing with that organization. And in that sense, PBI accompanied us directly in the communities in which I was working, doing popular education, judicial, legal, political formation, and strategic litigation in the field. And that was the only way that I was able to move about in the territory. There was no other way that I could move around there, because basically there was one situation where I wasn't able to be accompanied by PBI, and I was attacked. And I was saved by the driver of public transportation. They had me detained. They had me against the ground. They were going to assassinate me. And so that was the situation I was dealing with in that moment. And that was basically 10 or 12 years ago, about that. And then after that, with DH Colombia, in this last phase, it had to do with this protection scenario. In different parts of the country, there are different areas or regions of the country where PBI accompanies physically. They physically accompany our work, and they work with indigenous guards. And they go sometimes to different hearings or different movements around the country to offer security when we move through these regions. So basically, we try to have physical protection when we're moving around. So that's part of the really important accompaniment that PBI offers. So Colombia, even though we've signed peace accords more than 7 years ago, but that's still very recent history. So Colombia is still in flames. Colombia is still a country with many problems of safety concerns for human rights defenders. There's more than 50 human rights defenders assassinated per year. And so the accompaniment of PBI has been really important for DH Colombia for our formation and our protection in terms of digital security. And of course, the third piece, which is the advocacy, international advocacy, where they go speak to the diplomatic corps and international institutions, including different state and national organizations as well and institutions. So why do we continue to do this? It's because risk is still really high. I mean, just last year, I had about 12 different security incidents around there, whether being watched, threatened, or directly attacked. And that had to do with intelligence apparatuses or other people who do not tolerate the work of human rights defenders. So, it continues to be totally strategic for me, not just for me, but also DH Columbia. I'm sure that in the universe of organizations that provide accompaniment in Colombia and in Central America. And thank you so much, Germán. Your answer, you've also explained a little bit the importance of not just physical accompaniment, but also the other components, whether the political aspect, where we manage or inform, where we work on the social fabric. Well, you basically took away my second question. You already answered. But I have a third question for you. How do you feel that the presence of PBI volunteers have influenced the results that you've been able to achieve through your work? And I don't know if you could share, for instance, like one example or a story which stands out for you, in which PBI support has helped you to have positive impact in human rights in Colombia. Listen, I think that the ability to count on this field accompaniment is really important. It's incredible because when someone is working in conditions of that are kind of normal in different parts of Colombia, especially in the rural and campesino areas of the country, small towns. So that interaction between social leaders, communities, human rights defenders, accompaniers, international accompaniers, basically creates a community that allows work plans and the efforts, like for instance, our accompaniment of litigation, allows these things to move forward. If PBI wasn't accompanying us in certain areas of the country, we couldn't go in, we couldn't work there, and we couldn't carry out our work. It's that easy to understand. If PBI didn't come along with us and accompany us in different hearings that happen in Bogota, it would be impossible for us to have enough safety and security to be able to work as lawyers in those spaces. So in that sense, I could also name that there are a few different examples, two examples that come to mind and really stand out for me. The first one has to do with the struggle of the peace community of San Jose Apartado, what they've been doing to maintain and defend their land in the northwest of the country, very close to the border with Panama. it's near both the Atlantic and the Pacific Sea, the oceans, and it's very privileged in terms of resources, but there's also a gigantic level of violence. There have been so many assassinations, disappearances. 325 members of this organization have been assassinated or disappeared. So 5 or 6 years ago, they decided to take a judicial path, a legal path, to stand up to the threats against their lands. So that had something particular about it, something specific about it. This community was not in relationship with the state anymore. They couldn't have any kind of direct dialogue with the state. And so what we were able to do as the DH Columbia team, we couldn't do this in Urubá. We couldn't help the community access the lands, the plantations, the hearings, the courts without the accompaniment of PBI. We wouldn't have had the possibility of receiving rulings in favor of the community. We have direct conversation with government entities and institutions who really need to resolve the issue of land in a peaceful way. And we were able to deploy a documentation strategy in the field, showing each one of the community's plantations or lands. And in that work, PBI was really important. Physically in the field, accompanying us in the hearings, in our relations and our conversations with state authorities and judges, also advocacy with international institutions that are present here in Bogota, and then also following up on these situations through their communications efforts. So in that way, 6 years ago, the big risk was that the community was going to lose more than 50% of their territory. And up till today, they haven't lost any of their land. And that has to do with the unity that I mentioned. So PBI is part of that structure. So it's not that PBI is the savior. It's not that the campesino community is perfect or a savior. It's not that any one institution is the savior, but it's working together to achieve those goals. And it's something really impressive. It allows us to still believe in humanity and humanism. And the second example I have in mind has to do with a very specific exercise, key moment. In Colombia, it's a land of protest. There's almost always a protest going on. Some are smaller, some are larger. And there are different protest cycles. The last cycle of protest, one of them was from 2019 and 2020 with the pandemic, and then 2021. And that was like this big moment of like a big blow up societally. And that took away the life of many youths, boys and girls who were assassinated by the police, that they lost their eyes because the police attacked them. They were injured. There were women who were sexually assaulted. And then there were many youths who were put through the judicial system unjustly. So in that situation, in a country that's up in arms, we have police that are discriminating against the human rights defenders. And so it was really important that PBI was there. They were able to accompany the protest, but then they were also afterwards able to work towards justice, demand that they investigate the police and the soldiers who were involved in these crimes. And they also accompanied us as we collected evidence, as we went into the UN and accompanied the families. And now DH Colombia, the team I'm a part of, has the largest number of cases of extrajudicial assassination in this time period. And we're the only organization in the entire country who now has police officials who are being accountable in front of criminal courts. So that's in Cali, in Bogota, and in a town near Bogota, like Madrid. It's called Madrid, as it's like the Spanish capital. And there are cases in all those towns And so, that's one more example in the way that PBI has been really important in creating this sense of community. I think there's many other examples, honestly. Just a little while ago, they accompanied us near the Venezuelan border in a indigenous community. And thanks to the fact that we were able to bring together Bari, the PBI accompaniers, and the lawyers from DH Columbia, we were able to go into a city in which there's no mayor, there's no authorities. The UN, loses their vehicles to armed forces. And the only groups that have been able to enter is like when we come together, the Bari people, PBI, and DH Columbia. So that's a current example that but we've also seen this come up again and again during the time that I've worked with PBI. Oh, thank you so much, Germán, for explaining this to us. For me, hearing this motivates me. It reminds me that the work of PBI facilitates this kind of work that's so important that you all are doing. And I don't know if other people want to share.
Ahora vamos a hablar un poquito con Marie.
We're going to speak to Marie for a bit. Marie, thank you very much for being here. She's just back from Colombia, well, nearly. You came back just over a year ago. And so you've been in Germany for a year. I wanted to ask you, first of all, what motivated you to request to apply to volunteer as a field volunteer with PBI? Well, hi everyone, good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm very excited to be here and to answer your questions, and hopefully questions for prospective volunteers, and to say hi to Germán as well. I've been accompanying him in important moments. So initially, what motivated me the most to apply to volunteer was a volunteer in a social organization in Colombia before. And during that time, I felt that really it would have been much better to have been a professional person from Colombia doing that job. That's why I wanted to carry on in Colombia. And I approached PBI because it was wonderful to find an organization that was doing what was just and necessary, with the principle of not getting involved in the decisions of the organizations that operate there, who are really the experts and the ones that know how it works, the ones who had the experience and the pain. So that's what I really liked about PBI. That's why I applied. Also, thinking that, also liking the idea of non-violence, no weapons, just your voice and your waistcoat on. Thank you very much, Marie. I wanted to ask you about your experience as a volunteer, as a field work volunteer in PBI in Colombia. How was your experience working there in Colombia? And how can you compare this experience with the expectations you had before you started? That's a big question. All of my expectations were completely reached and beyond, because it was difficult for me. It was almost 3.5 years over there. So it was there were loads of things going on. I've been accompanying a lot in social protests during the pandemic. But in general, I think that highlights the diversity of the work that a field volunteer does. As you said earlier on, Sophia, about what PBI does is a lot more than just some principles is what you do day to day. What I can say
sobre todo en lo físico, pues
is that his work involved lots of places, going to different places, accompanying people and organizations. And this obviously is a present, you know, it's a joy to listen, to get to know people, to hear stories. I accompanied Germán, and like he was saying, we are part of a movement, always as outsiders, but we get
en los pensamientos, cómo se puede
included, we get included in the information with the letter C. And obviously we follow PBI rules in doing this.
Es que realmente es un análisis
And this is very important as well. It's all of the regions where we've been working. Is obviously the work is not against the security. It's about
sin riesgo de
analyzing the situation really to check that we can really get in. Obviously, it's not about increasing the risks to the organizations. That's very important. And this is another incident, is another part of PBI as field worker. It's all about the political accompaniment regionally and locally. And lastly, PBI is not just external, but it's also very internal.
El tema de la horizontalidad y el tema de
We
que no
said,
hay
said it
jefe,
before.
no hay decisión desde
It's about that there isn't a boss, there isn't a decision coming from above. You listen to all of the parties from within to reach a consensus and to reach the best solution for the brigadiers or for the organization or for the organizations that are being accompanied. So yes, it's a great variety of work and you'll never get bored.
Tienes toda la razón. Yo recuerdo que
No,
pues cuando yo
when you were
estaba
talking about how horizontal this is, I was thinking when I was there, we were working in the same way, and PBI is a very unique organization in that way. I've never worked for anybody like this. It's a very healthy way of working in an environment that can be very stressful, under a lot of pressure, especially with safety issues that can be really hard.
Si nos podías quizás dar
Maria, I wanted to
o
ask you
describir
as
una
well.
experiencia o
Could you describe an experience or a situation that is memorable that you had while you were a volunteer that might show us what the essence of the PBI work is? Well, I've got a few examples, but yeah, I feel there is one example that it had a great impact on
muy bueno para todo lo que tiene que
me up until now. And I think that shows how PBI really works as an accompanying. In Barranca Mesa team, we accompanied an organization of peasants, human rights defenders, and that organization has worked and reported many cases of human rights violations in an area that have been
y entonces
forgotten for decades and decades. And this sub-region has quite a high profile because of all of the things that are happening there. So they were suffering quite constantly with threats for a while. And there was an attack to the legal representative in that organization at the time. So what happened? They came to us
con esta tensión y con este miedo de
with
que
different petitions
mira, está pasando esto y
and telling us this is what's happening, what can we do? Because their biggest wish and their biggest focus was to keep staying in the field. They didn't, in the land, they didn't want to leave, and they didn't want to leave the peasant community in that land that would, without them, would be on their own without
para traer los casos
any accompaniment, would just be on their own, fighting by themselves. So this was what PBI did, and this was a surprise for me from the beginning. They reacted in an integral, holistic way and very quickly to what was happening. So as field team, where we accompany them constantly,
hacer su día a día.
all the time, especially in the city of Barranquilla, so they could start doing meetings with internationally, multilateral organizations, with the government, internationally, thanks to PBI UK and other PBI groups. So national groups also worked really hard to face all of these threats and all of the things that were happening.
Sí, salió en muchas charlas también de la
At an
ONU
international
o
level.
en la Unión Europea, etcétera. Entonces fue
reaching the EU, the UN. It was a very, very fast, strong movement. And with analysis, we decided we would accompany them, not just in the cities, but in the region, in the rural areas where they had suffering big threats and where there were lots of actors that wanted
y eso me impactó
to harm them. And in the end, we went in a few times and it worked. It worked. Obviously, the risk was always there, but the work could be carried out and they could carry on doing their work, the work they started. So that's my most significant example. And I always wanted to say,
y porque obviamente nosotras como equipo pues nos llegó mucha atención,
what happens internally in PBI. We also got lots of pressure, but emotionally affected us a lot. So there was also accompaniment accompanied by PBI. So there's always always a lot of looking after internally, internal support to be able to carry on. Muchas gracias, María. Muchas veces que estas cosas no se piensan, ¿no? Cuando se está haciendo el trabajo en el campo, pero es muy importante. It's very important to look after each other. It's very important. It's as important to look after each other.
Something I want to talk about is for anyone who is considering becoming a volunteer with PBI. What, in your opinion, are the three pieces of advice, the three main pieces of advice that you would give them so that they could get prepared for the challenges and the responsibilities that are involved in being a field volunteer? Well, I think initially there are many things that you can't be prepared for. And I think knowing that is a good way to get prepared. Just knowing that there are many things that you can't prepare for because the situation in Colombia is very volatile. And there are many things that you won't be able to plan. For example, the threat, pandemic, a different big social explosion. Those are things that happen in a moment, and you can analyze, you can get physically prepared, but you also have to have patience in terms of not knowing. Another thing that I would like to say for preparing yourself is understanding that being a field PBI volunteer, it also means a lot of responsibility because of the fact that the field teams are pretty much always the first point of contact for the human rights defenders organizations. They can come there and they can share their fears, their threats that they're facing. The field team also has a lot of responsibility and things to take care of. So, I think there it's really important to have this in mind and have it clear. And I think lastly, I would also say be patient in terms of horizontality. Horizontality, it doesn't always mean working as fast as possible, but it's the most beautiful way of working. It just needs patience. Also motivation, energy. It's a 18-month process in this moment in time that basically someone applies. That's relatively a small amount of time, but it's also a lot of work. So, having the motivation, the energy to want to do this, and also be flexible in terms of the accompaniments and what's happening. So I think that's something that like mentally you could get prepared for. And also bring a lot of sunscreen because you spend a lot of time outside under the sun. Very true. Yeah, that Colombian sun. Well, thank you so much, Mari, for your answers and for sharing your time with us. Now I think it's the moment where we can answer a few questions from the public. There's a lot of questions here, perhaps too many. And so maybe we have time only for one question. So Germán, maybe we can start with you. We have a question for you, which comes from people who maybe who aren't going to be able to go work with PBI in the field. And so the question is, what can they do to support your work and other human rights defenders' work if they aren't able to go and be a volunteer there in the field? Well, I think there are several options. The first is to learn more about the situation, get informed about the situation. I think that's of the greatest importance. Not just the situation just in Colombia, but the human rights situation in general. I think we have some very, very serious problems in the Western Hemisphere in terms of human rights. And I don't think we're being serious enough in, learning more. And that allows us to be in an event in which, maybe you can join the PBI's, communications. Follow their website, follow their social media, get on their newsletter, mailing list. PBI is very careful, very prudent. So it's very rare that they're going to have like a campaign the way that other, other social media campaigns that you see. But I think if you follow their social media, that's going to be really important. And then another thing is, to be totally honest, nowadays, with the crises that we're seeing across the world, for example, the genocide that's being committed against the Palestinian people, the crisis, the very serious crisis of human rights violations that we're seeing against immigrants, migrants who are coming up to the EU border, the UK border, the US border, and now we could add Australia. There's a crisis there as well. So all these human rights themes and topics, for instance, in Latin American or African countries, those are not so interesting anymore. And we're seeing a complete absence of political support, economic support. And in that sense, it can be really important to join in on a political and economic support campaigns. That's of great importance. In Colombia today, it's becoming increasingly difficult because Colombia continues to be the most violent country against human rights defenders, environmental rights defenders. We see attacks against women human rights defenders. I just was reading that they killed a woman leader and a human rights leader. And so there's this narrative that says, oh, Colombia is a middle income country, and the World Organization, OSDA, has said that they're in the club of the rich, and they signed the peace accords, and now they're in a transition period. They have a great government, and that government has a little bit less of a violent narrative against human rights defenders. But despite these conditions, the situation continues to be really difficult, which is the reason why it's still important to pay attention to the communications that we share, the information that we produce. So that's something really important. I've never said that before. In my entire life, I've never talked about this topic of resources because we never come to these spaces talking about these kinds of needs. But nowadays, it's really impossible to continue our work. We're feel like we're being strangled. But it's true in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Venezuela, because we hear that oh, you just have to support states and not civil society. And without civil society, we can't have the construction of democracies. We can't have the possibility of having respect for the rule of law or people's rights. And then the third point is that if you're not able to come this year, you can participate through the possibility of making this topic a part of your day-to-day life in your conversations with your friends and with other people. Maybe there's other people who are going to be interested, and then you'll be able to respond, you or them, in future calls for volunteers. Because PBI doesn't just work in Colombia, but they have other projects across Latin America. And there are countries that need this hand. They need people to lend a hand, and they need to have this collective construction.
Thank you very much, Germán. The next question is for Marie. Marie, how was it for you, the experience of leaving the field work, and how has it been the influence of such work for your career, in your career now? Well, I think 3.5 years is not the usual. So for me, it was quite difficult to leave. But even probably 18 months would have been the same. So I'm very grateful to have been able to be there longer, but I would have loved to stay for longer and carried on accompanying. But it's also necessary to pause as well. We see, hear a lot of things, analyze a lot of things, and it obviously has an impact. My career, well, as a social worker after PBI, I was a bit lost, to be honest. Now I'm in a village in Germany doing social work. So in that way, well, PBI didn't launch my career. It wasn't essential in the progress of my career, but it was essential for my being, for me, for myself. Of what I felt, my social network here and over there. Yes, it's something that really resonates with oneself and with one's point of view, with the empathy that you can develop towards other people. And even news here, and now I'm here with news, you think in a different way, you approach things in a different way. So this is something not just good for one's career. You know, it looks good in the CV as well, but it's also from a personal point of view and a daily life point
lleva consigo de Colombia y
of
de
view.
ese
It
trabajo.
has made a big impact.
Sí, yo creo que, haber
Yeah, I think, well,
el de PBI,
having
pues,
worked with PBI
da varias cosas en términos de,
gives you loads of things professionally as well, but obviously, as you say, you said very eloquently, it does change your way of seeing things. It gives you maturity. Oh, that happened with me anyway.
Trabajado con PBI terminan trabajando
Made
en
me
otras
mature.
organizaciones internacionales.
Obviously, people who work in other organizations, governmental, legal, international organizations, end up being human rights defenders as well by themselves. There's also a network of ex-volunteers that is very big, very wide, and really, really nice and positive as well. So I think that unfortunately,
veo que hay algunas personas que
we've taken enough time of you, enough of your time. Sorry for those who've asked questions, and we didn't have time to forward them to Marie and Germán. But I'd like to propose that if you still have those questions and want to ask Marie or Germán, please put them in an email for PBI UK. Reply to the email that
pueden tener su respuesta.
You'll receive after this event, and we'll forward your questions for them to be answered.
Most people will be speaking English or be a UK-based audience. But I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for coming today. And of course, thank you very much to Marie and to Germán for giving up your time and speaking to us today. It's been truly enlightening, and it's so motivating being able to hear about your experiences and that the work is still going strong. For those of you who are in the audience and who have attended this evening, thanks again. We'll be sending out an email after this event, which has links to all of the things that we've been discussing. So job opportunities. So for those of you who might be interested in joining the field team in Colombia or who want to volunteer in the Office of PBI UK, you'll have those links there. And likewise to the video. That we showed here in this event. We hope that you have learned a lot. And again, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And we look forward to meeting you all soon. Thanks.